I've realized Christianity is more plausible than I thought. Alex O'Connor. More Alex O'Connor YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe, like their video, but also subscribe to us and hit that bell so you're notified when we do these. But listen, I'm a fan of Alex O'Connor. I haven't had an opportunity to interview with him. We've had very few interaction, communicating, if you will, through other means of social media. Busy guy. But I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to say here on what he means by he's realized Christianity is more plausible than he thought. I'd like to know why. And, you know, as a huge fan of his, and he's a bright mind, especially philosophically, far brighter than I am right now. I've never studied philosophy like that, but I have dug into all sorts of stuff that I imagine he hasn't. And I've spoken to scholars that I imagine he hasn't. So let's see what he has to say on the plausibility of Christianity seeming more true than not. Here we go.
I talk about this and I debate this all the time, and I debate whether Jesus was God or whether he even claimed to be God and all of this kind of stuff. But for me, the undeniable thing is that there's this extraordinary historical figure who did something extraordinary. And there's...
I wouldn't say undeniable. Highly more probable, probably. I mean, I'm on the side that there was probably a guy named Jesus, but let me just back him up a few seconds because I don't want to interrupt his sentence here. He has debated on God's existence recently with David Wood. But let's see what he says.
Ordinary historical figure who did something extraordinary. And there's something really
extraordinary. Could he be charismatic?
Weird that happened that caused a bunch of people to start quite early on worshipping him, which is a very strange thing to do to a human being, especially in a Jewish culture.
We got to pause. So let's just understand something. This guy's methodical, right? Alex is very methodical. This might be a bit of a critique to Alex here, but only an instructive one that I think might be a blind spot on the research that maybe he's looked into, because so many academics only look through a purely Jewish lens and do not consider much more material. Like much more. They have, like, there's so much to consider. Like this book right here, right? It won like an winning thing. Cattell Berthelot. She wrote Jews and the Roman Rivals. This book actually points out, it's called Jews and Their Roman Rivals, Pagan Rome's Challenge to Israel. And ultimately points out the competitive nature the Jews had with their rivals, Rome, Greek, these major cultures that were influencing everyone and everything. That meant even though some of the Jews were in competition with them, they were still influenced and impacted by their ideas. So I think this is worthy of a read. But the more recent book, I mean, shoot, I've got Mythologizing Jesus by Dennis MacDonald, showing how they mythologized the historical Jesus, a Jewish guy from the Galilee. Of course, he talks about imitating Homer because this is Greek literature, right? We keep talking about Jewish culture and talking about it's weird that they would worship a Jewish guy, you know, and this is odd. It's really not odd at the end of the day that this guy gets deified, especially when the target audience is a Gentile audience. It is the broader Greco-Roman world. So the Gospels and Homer, of course, Luke and Virgil. So that you already have like Gospel of Luke and Acts are imitating and in competition with Rome's Virgil, one of the most popular pieces of literature. The Dionysian Gospel, the Gospel of John, has so many Dionysian elements in competition with the Greco-Roman demigod Dionysus, who was born of a mortal woman and a godfather, right? This guy was in the bosom, Dionysus was in the bosom of his father, the same way the Logos in John. I just don't know if he's read some of this stuff, because he really should read the overlap, the syncretism, the kind of influence. But the book I really wanted to get to was by a Christian. I believe he's a Christian. Jesus, right? And Other Sons of God, Luke's Christology and Mediterranean Myth. And this guy spearheads the absolute notion of why would they have worshipped and deified this figure and such without having to go down the two paths or the two powers of heaven angle to try and explain everything that typically apologists do. They go to only Jewish sources. They only look for a Jewish antecedent. When look no further than some of these academics, and I got Richard Miller back here on my shelf. You cannot miss this book. resurrection and reception in early Christianity. So I need to say up front, right now, the whole premise that's being presented here is just false. Love Alex to death. This is constructive criticism. I know he'd do the same for me, but this is because I respect him. And I wish that if he knew more about this scholarship and the various scholars, Robin Faith Walsh, you name it, that are coming up with amazing scholarship in this vein, I can promise you it wouldn't seem so odd that in a Mediterranean world, any figure from any region, potentially, especially when your target audience is Gentile, would obviously deify a figure like that. Now, sorry for the long thing, but I had to, man, because if you're going to make this, what's more plausible, like, how do we explain this? It's so obvious to explain. In competition with the imperial cult, in competition with the Mediterranean mystery cults, Dionysus is on every corner. Remember, the Ptolemies ruled this region, and Dionysus was their guy. Even the Scythopolis, right? Scythopolis was literally 19 miles from Nazareth in the Galilee. It's in the region of the Galilee. That is where Dionysus buried his nurse, and some myths say he was even born. Okay, I think there's more here. Chew my flesh, drink my blood. I am the true vine. Well, this kind of stuff, you can find Jewish overlaps, the root of Jesse, but you can also see Dionysus was the true vine, the literal vine where the grape comes out and the grape is the blood, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now to Alex.
And so, to me, getting at the Gospels from a scholarly perspective helps me to understand who this historical figure was. That's the thing I'm really interested in, almost in the way that somebody might be really interested in Julius Caesar or in whether the Iliad, whether the Trojan War really happened and whether that kind of stuff. I sort of take this approach.
That feels to me like that was your point of entry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're going to do that, you really have to understand the Greco-Roman world more and not just purely through a Jewish lens. You really do need to understand both Jewish and, of course, the Hellenistic world. Jesus Deus by M. David Litwell, I would recommend also is another book that helps you understand this crossover and how this could have easily happened.
But you've had such a journey and you've met so many amazing people and you've debated so many different angles and things. Yeah. Where's it led you to?
It's led me to, I used to be quite on board with the new atheism stuff. I've spoken about this a lot on my show.
What does that mean?
You know, like the sort of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, it was really popular, the debates that they were doing, they called it new atheism.
Yeah.
And it was this body of like atheist thought with the God delusion, this kind of stuff, which was really popular. And it had this sort of quite strident, debate me bro kind of attitude. And I was really swept up by that. I thought that was really exciting and cool. And I was beginning to sort of shake that.
I'm still kind of swept up by it. I think this stuff is cool. I don't know what maybe Alex sees wrong with it at this point. I'd be curious to interview and talk with him about this. But I think that there's a lot there that they say that is good and worthy of consideration.
That often grow up a bit, essentially. And then running the podcast, what I've realized is that this is far more interesting and intricate, and I would say plausible than I'd given it credit for before. So, I'm still not a Christian.
More plausible than he gave credit to it before. Huh. I would say it is more intricate, but I came in through the intricate angle, and now just really discovering some of the critiques of these new atheist types that you call new atheists. I don't know how new they are. Someone told me in the comment section on one of my videos on this channel that we're talking 80s. Like, this has been around for 40 years. It's how new is the new atheist movement, really? They've been, like, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins have been critical of religion for decades and decades. So it may have gained popularity over time as they gained more notoriety. But plausibility, I think the more I have researched and studied it, what seems more plausible is that maybe Jesus was a charismatic guy who really did some noble things for his people at his time, or attempted to under the kind of conditions they were living in. And as a charismatic cult leader kind of guy, he gets killed for noble reasons, unjustly, let's just say, especially based on our modern conceptions of morality. Like, no one should be put to death for that reason. Though, there's people who praise when people get killed for words today. Okay. You know, you have this kind of idea. There's that kind of idea. But at the end of the day, the miraculous and all that, like, come on, man, that's a dime a dozen. Everybody's doing that, and I don't buy it.
Some people say to me, like, you know,
it's a funny word though, that anyway.
Yeah.
Like I'm less and less certain about the word.
Yeah.
You know what somebody said to me the other day? You're like this. The period of greatest growth ever in the history of the church was from 33 AD to 350.
Yeah.
And during this time, there was no church buildings, no sermons, but no singing, and no Bible.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there. I imagine they had to have had meeting places of some sort. The idea that there weren't churches, I don't know how factual that is. They had textual material they considered sacred. They didn't have a Bible. You don't have to have a Bible to have sacred literature. But then again, Alex is talking to a very popular guy here. This is like a famous guy, Bear Grylls, for those of you who don't know, who did like a Survivor type show. So maybe he's just kind of getting along and he's not trying to give too much pushback and he's trying to have a good conversation. I get it, because I don't do pushback like that. But as an observer out here, I can be critical. But when I'm interviewing, I'd probably be more like Alex and more chilled out on this. But this guy makes it sound miraculous. Like, oh, they couldn't have done this. They couldn't have done that. The question is, did Mormons, for example, have the Book of Mormon and the established doctrines and covenants and all that when they were being persecuted and still spreading and growing in all the other states that they were in? I would ask the question to Alex O'Connor, since he brought this up on a different show I recently reacted to. Think about that with Bear Grylls here. You know,
and like we get very tied up in all of those things and the labels and even the phrase Christian.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not sure where for me it feels quite like man-made, these sort of words.
Yeah, and that is where I can definitely agree with, especially a Christian of your kind, which is to say someone who will say that and recognize that. Because some people place a lot of stock, particularly Catholics, and they place a lot of stock in church tradition and the traditions that developed after Nicaea. And I look at that with a similar kind of man-made skepticism. And I think to myself, yeah, like it also gives me license to, when I look at the New Testament and I think, you know, some scholars think that Paul maybe didn't write that letter and that's a big problem. But for someone like me, it's like, who cares? If I decide that Paul didn't write 1 Timothy, then I'll just look at the rest of it and I'll try to work out what came between the lines. A good friend of mine said to me once, when there's all this discussion about whether we have the real words of Jesus and whether the Gospels are accurate and whether it's all apocryphal stories, he said that because these were written from early church traditions, Jesus was a real man who was doing real things. We can still know a lot about the character of Jesus. He said, imagine if, for example, have you heard of the Churchillian drift, where like quotes get attributed to Churchill, even though he never said them? Same thing happens with C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And he said, imagine if the only information you had historically about Churchill was a book of apocryphal quotes that he never actually said, but that people believed he said. You'd still get a pretty good picture of the kind of person Winston Churchill was.
That's worst case scenario. You still get a pretty good...
You're still getting an image. And so I'm really interested in the scholarly stuff and like, you know, well, did Jesus really say that? Was this an interpolation? Blah, blah, blah. Is this a translation thing? But...
You could say that, yeah. To some degree, maybe some of these sayings do go back, especially the more embarrassing ones like you will not have gone through all the houses of Israel before the Son of Man comes, or the apocalyptic ones. But then again, you know... If someone attributed to Churchill something that may not seem like he could have said it, then you got questions, right?
The thing that's most fascinating to me below all of that is like, who was this guy and what was he doing to cause all of this? Even if it's a bunch of confusion and confused timelines, and even if some stories got in there that shouldn't have got in there, the fact that this scramble to write all of this down and turn it into
even with the drift.
Exactly. It's still
I think
extremely interesting.
If we could time travel, you would be one of the rough gang. So would I.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd be, I mean, even though you kind of like, the headlines of you is like, you know, professor, sort of Oxford. Well, are you a professor?
I'm not a professor, no.
You're very clever. Do you know what I mean? That could potentially like put you into the Pharisee type thing. Right. But you are the opposite. You are what you would have been running wild. with Jesus, I think.
Yeah, I like
And
that. So.
and also, I sort of always got the feel with Jesus. He loved the challenge. He loved the riposte. He loved the mental, verbal, like theological challenges.
A lot of jousting, yeah, a lot of
jousting and brilliant sort of responses that have never been better. You know, whether it's in like, should we pay our taxes to Caesar or not? You know, the Pharisees are trying to trip him up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sort of that response of just like, well, whose head is on the coin? You know?
Yeah, I mean, does that not sound like more like a clever, crafted example of something? Or did it go back to Jesus? Maybe it went back to Jesus. Maybe. Sounds like people had some time to think about some clever things to put in the mouth of their guy. You know, at the end of the day, whatever. It is clever. There's some interesting, funny ways to get out of some of these, you know, holes. But you get this in other literature too, though, right? So there are other figures and philosophers and stuff who have these clever, witty ways to get out. Socrates was great. I mean, there's all sorts of cool stuff. And yeah, they deified these figures as well often.
Paid him and paid to God what is God. It's sort of brilliant.
Yeah, there's a brilliant.
And I would think that I see a beautiful alignment, actually. I think if we would go back in time travel, you'd be running wild with him.
Well, if the science ever gets there and we manage to go back in time, when people say, you know, where would you go?
Yeah, where would you go? Come on, what would you do?
Of course you'd go to meet Jesus.
I love it. What point? Where would you go? Would you go after the resurrection, or would you want to be there at the beginning? What about in the 17 years?
That's interesting. You know, I think that the moment that you'd want to witness, if you could only have 5 minutes, would be the moment of the crucifixion. And the reason is that you would see that this was a man, the crucifixion happened, you would see whether the curtain tore, whether the sky opened, all of that kind of stuff. And it would give you all of that. I mean,
But they keep finding evidence for like the, I think in the sort of, you know, the star stuff and they said there was
like the solar eclipse.
The solar eclipse. I've actually done it. It's the exact kind of like
That's really interesting.
It's really interesting.
No, they didn't. I got a friend, Star Bethlehem, Aaron Adair. Check him out. He's debunked this whole thing about these events happening at this time. I believe it's the Star Bethlehem specifically with a birth narrative, but I don't think that the crucifixion. I don't know if he did discuss the crucifixion solar eclipse idea, but it's like, where do you want to pin it? It's easy to try and find. Let me find a year between 30 or 29 and 34 that had as an eclipse that might be around this time. Like, I don't think there's like a specific exact Passover date or you know, the day before Passover solar eclipse. It just seems a little too good to be true, and I doubt it. Doesn't seem like they've actually proven that.
And also that moment is kind of also to see the first ever Roman Christian. Well,
yes, yeah.
The centurion truly son of God.
Yeah.
This man is the son of God.
But then part of
that's interesting. You go to that moment. That's kind of cool.
But part of me would say, although, yeah, you want to see the resurrection, you want to see part of me wants to say I would just like to meet him walking along during his ministry and just say, listen, man, I've got 5 minutes.
Yes.
Who are you? Like,
are you the real deal?
Messiah, are you God? Are you claiming to be God? Like, that's what I'd want to do. I'd want to ask.
So I'd have a different, personally, it would just be different for me. If I had to choose, tell me what your thoughts are. Comment down below. If you could go back in time, just say we had to go see Jesus, where in his life would you want to go? I personally would want to see where he was buried, okay? Because the central claim that became the most important in Christianity, this doesn't take away from him being a Jewish teacher, a rabbi who had good teachings that may have taught some great things, been a charismatic leader, had a powerful movement that started. His brother James took over, kind of like a caliphate, you know, continued the movement. This movement with Peter, James' like right-hand buddy, that kind of competes with the Pauline Christianity. I'd want to be there at the death and the burial and be able to monitor the tomb and see, hey, did they relocate him to a different tomb? This kind of leads me into James Tabor, which I'm looking into some cool stuff, hoping to learn more about the Talpia tomb and stuff too, interested in that. But I'd like to be able to do that because the whole notion that Jesus rose bodily from the grave, and if you interpret Paul to mean literally anastasis from the actual same body he's in, is transformed and comes up, meaning there's no bones, there's no body, I'd want to see that, and I'd actually know, hey, there we go. That's what I'd want to see and go, he didn't rise. They moved him to a different location and people were confused, or The whole thing was a legend. He was never buried in some tomb, whatever. I mean, you can come up with whatever explanation. I'd want to go to that spot, not the crucifixion. Jews were crucified all the time. You know, what do you want to do? Hear him say, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or do you want to hear him like, into your hands I commend my spirit? You want to know if he said all those words? I mean, like those kinds of things. The Roman centurion? Nah. I personally want to see the resurrection moment and be able to go, yeah, just like I thought, this is a story and it never happened. That this guy never rose from the dead. Come on.
That question. And I mean, where would you go in Jesus' life?
And if someone still wanted to say he rose from the dead spiritually, well, shit, I'm a spiritual billionaire.
5 minutes.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I think, so, I mean, if you think of the biblical, so there are a lot of people that did get that chance and did it come exactly for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, say, I mean, one bit you might not have noticed that I really like is John the Baptist's relationship with Jesus. We kind of touched on it, but there's a really nice moment where if you think if anyone in the Jesus orbit is going to believe in him, it's John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Known him from birth, kicking inside my mother's stomach whenever Jesus walked in the room. Like, I know this guy is a real deal. I'm baptizing the River Jordan, saying there was one is coming after me is like, you know, I know.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when he was in Herod's prison and he gets a chance to get a message to his disciples, the one thing he says is go back to Yeshua and just ask him, you really are who you say you are.
Is it you?
And I love that because like, if even John the Baptist had doubts, because of he's like being tortured and in a brutal prison and like we're human, you know, then I can have doubts. And it's like, he's been a real hero of mine, actually, John the Baptist.
Me too. I think he's my favorite person.
Well, it's interesting you say that.
So
I'd be interested what I like about him.
Stay tuned. James Tabor has a course, and it'll blow your freaking mind. If you're interested in John the Baptist, you want to know more about it and how this movement from John the Baptist, kind of the Qumran Dead Sea, kind of moved to John the Baptist, moved to James, the brother of the Lord, and on. There was a whole different kind of Christianity before this whole death, burial, resurrection, atonement for 3 days, you know, with Paul, all of that. There was a different kind of Christianity that existed, and it wasn't called Christianity, of course. It was a pre-Jesus movement, so to speak, a pre-Christian one. It is going to be a great course. Stay tuned. I'll get you the link. If you're interested, let me know.
Is that everyone always, Jesus says there's no one being greater.
Yes.
He is the number one in the prophets.
That's
number
right.
one. And I always think,
He's the greatest of all women, all men born of women. No one is greater than John the Baptist. That's beyond greatest of the prophets. No one is better. Jesus was born of a woman. John the Baptist and Jesus were both born of women. And he's saying John is better than anyone. Jesus said that.
like, we think to be number one in life, you've got to be like a leader. You got to be like, I would think Moses or one of these people, like on top of the mountain, the big beard, the loud voice, the authority. It's how we're brought up to think these are our people in our lives who are the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it was the rough one who lived off the land and was wild and just loved this Yeshua character. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said no one better. Why do you like him?
I think he's fascinating because he seems to be this sort of precursor to Jesus in a weird way. He's the introduction to Jesus. There's a bit of mystery as to who he was and why he was baptizing.
Imagine, just playing around here, being a little bit mockery. Imagine we went back in time and he said, I want to actually see John the Baptist. And you go out to the wilderness and there's this nut job with total dread head, nappy dread head, completely disgusting, worn out. Hey, prepare the way of the Lord. And he's like just this lunatic apocalypticist who's, got some mental illness because he's out here in the desert and he's living off the land. He's just kind of a crazy dude. And, we were able to transport him back into the future, and we did some diagnosis and realized he had mental illnesses and stuff like that. And all these people are like so superstitiously looking at these people who have these like strange behaviors and how they live, and they go, these are our prophets, these are our figures. I mean, honestly, there is something about that. Like the ancients really admired people who heard voices in their head. They thought they were gods. Could have been a schizophrenic. Could have been someone with BPD or some other kind of illness, but they identified that as the god speaking to them or some divine capabilities. And that's like the problem with being able to get back in time and see what these guys were really like. And me and Richard Miller, we laugh about that. Richard Miller, who wrote this book I recommend, we laugh about that all the time. What if we went back and saw Jesus saying this and that? And it's like, we just make funny jokes. It's so funny. But anyway.
And why he found his way into the wilderness and what it means to preach a baptism for the repentance of sins and why Jesus would need to undergo that. All of these questions are so interesting. There are also communities of people who particularly revere John the Baptist. There's a group called the Mandaeans who are like this Gnostic sect who think that John the Baptist is the most important prophet. Now, they see Jesus as a false prophet, actually. There's this whole historical fascination with John the Baptist because and it's also the insistence early on that he is not the Messiah. You do it
keep saying I'm not the guy,
which implies to me that at the time there were lots of people who thought he was the Messiah, and
because that's what happens. People want to think somebody's great, and then the power goes to your head.
And when Herod Antipas first hears about Jesus,
I feel like Alex is kind of trying to slow down for Bear Grylls here, because I know Bear Grylls, I don't think, is picking up everything that Alex is saying here. Alex is saying some powerful stuff.
He goes,
if you take the idea that he goes, listen, I am not the Messiah, then whoever wrote that he's saying he's not, which, by the way, people probably did think that John the Baptist was the Messiah, that becomes a problem. You got a John the Baptist movement versus a Jesus movement. Well, how do you get the John the Baptist guys to jump ship and be part of yours? Well, you get them to show compliment where they show John as a very highly valued figure, but also that John is pointing to Jesus going, that's a good guy. You know what I mean?
This guy is John the Baptist reborn in the Gospels. And so what was John the Baptist doing if when he hears this Jesus guy, it reminds him of John? So it seems like John the Baptist had this incredible ministry, and he must have been doing all kinds of interesting things, and there were all kinds of people who thought he was the Messiah. And so and we only get clues to that in the Gospels. And so I'd be fascinated. Do you know what? Maybe I'd go to the baptism, because I'd love to meet John the Baptist.
With the sky open.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool to see too.
The fact that Bear Grylls believes this stuff, I know Alex is being nice here, but I have a hard time thinking Alex thinks that's true. I mean, there's so much mythology about that too.
Because if
you go right there to Virgil's Aeneid. I cover this in so many of my videos, y'all. If you haven't watched my big channel on Mythvision, there are so many sources that echo this. I did a long one on the baptism. It's like a 3-hour video on the baptism. I go through mystery religions. I go through the PGM, the magical papyri. I go through, these are ancient shaman magicians who are having these kind of similar experiences of a kind of that baptismal moment. Even Ahura Mazda, right, or Zoroaster is said at around the age of 30 to be near a body of water, like a river, and then has the heavens open, and he gets this revelation where he is now on this mission, this divine mission. There is a lot of overlap in the ancient Near East that should have anyone pause.
See that, then you know, because you can't fake that, So in a way, that's as convincing as a resurrection. Because if you're there and you literally see this guy up in the voice of God going, "This is my son,"
and the dove, you kind of get a proof of the Trinity.
Mark doesn't speak it publicly. Only Matthew gives the whole voice out loud. Mark's only talking to Jesus.
Well, it's like
you get to meet John, and you get to see Jesus. It's all there. I think
you know what?
That
they
might be
all
the
saw
moment.
all these things, and yet the next day
yeah.
they would go, "Well,
not so sure.
The clouds could have." And was the voice? Was it thunder that sound?
No. All right, I'm going to stop it there. This is hilarious because it sounds like Bear believes these stories happened. Someone wrote this stuff. Someone crafted this material, probably using real stuff. What do you think about this? Where would you like to travel in time? What do you think about this Alex O'Connor video? I feel like Alex is soft pitching and being super, super nice to Bear Grylls, but I definitely don't agree with the title that it makes Christianity more plausible before. Maybe for him, not for me. The more you study, the more you realize, nah. Subscribe, hit the bell, check all, share it out there, like this video, comment down below, give me your recommendations, and until next time, see you then.